Leonard "Lenny" Johnson, a war veteran who'd fought for the freedoms he was often denied, never expected to face racism in one of his favorite familiar places, a local diner. When he was asked to remove his MAGA hat, it wasn't just about the policy. It was a slap in the face of everything he had sacrificed. How he responded to that humiliation will shock even the most seasoned. But let's start from the beginning. Leonard "Lenny" Johnson had never been one to back down. As a retired Army veteran, he had seen the brutalities of war, the loss of friends, and the stark realities of battle. His service had taught him much about sacrifice, not just for his country, but for the ideals of justice and equality, principles he fought for, even when his country didn't always return the favor. Now, years after leaving the military, Lenny wore his experience like armor. He had witnessed firsthand the racism and injustice that plagued America, but he'd also learned how to endure it, how to stand tall in the face of it. His MAGA hat, though controversial to some, wasn't a political statement to him. It was a symbol of resilience. To Lenny, it represented strength in adversity, a reminder that despite everything, he was still here, still standing. But this time, things were different. Lenny had just settled into his usual booth when Steve, the manager, approached. Steve was a tall, white man, probably in his 40s, who had always been a bit too eager to assert his authority. This time, however, he had a tightness in his posture that caught Lenny's attention. "Sorry, sir," Steve said, his voice forced, "but we have a no-hats policy here. You'll need to take that off." Lenny looked up, not entirely surprised. He'd dealt with enough microaggressions in his life to know what was coming. But something about Steve's tone struck him differently today. It wasn't just the policy. It was the way Steve was looking at him, his eyes flicking nervously between the MAGA cap and Lenny's face, as if there was something inherently wrong with the sight of him wearing it. Lenny leaned back in his seat and raised an eyebrow, his voice steady. "I'm just here for lunch, son. Ain't nobody bothering you, right?" Steve hesitated for a moment, his gaze darting back to the hat before answering. "It's just company policy. You can't wear that here. It's disruptive." The word disruptive hit Lenny hard. It wasn't about the hat. It was about the way Steve spoke to him, as if he were a problem to be dealt with. As if Lenny's mere presence, a black man in a MAGA hat, was something that needed to be corrected. In that moment, Lenny could feel the familiar sting of racial prejudice, but it wasn't just the hat. It was the tone. It was the dismissal. It was the subtle way Steve assumed he didn't belong here. Outside, the cool air hit him, but it did little to cool the fire building inside. Another day, another indignity, another reminder that no matter how much you sacrifice, you'll never fully belong. Lenny paused for a moment on the sidewalk, clenching his fists. He was used to this kind of treatment. He had faced it his entire life, but it never stopped hurting. The sting of being treated as less than, as an outsider in his own country, was something that never got easier. But what Lenny didn't know, as he stood there stewing in frustration, was that this small injustice would soon snowball into something far bigger. Something that would force people to confront the hidden prejudices that permeated even the most everyday of interactions. He turned and walked away, unaware that the next few days would change everything. The incident would spark a chain of events that would challenge not only the restaurant's policies, but the very system that allowed men like Steve to dismiss and disrespect someone like him. The next day, Lenny was sitting at home watching TV when his phone rang. It was his old friend, Marcus, a fellow veteran who had worked with him on several community initiatives. "Hey man, you see what happened at Crescent Bistro yesterday?" Marcus asked. Lenny's heart sank. You heard about that? Yeah, they kicked me out because of my hat. You know, the usual. Can't win for losing. Marcus chuckled softly, but there was a serious tone in his voice. Man, I think there's something bigger going on. I've been doing some digging. You won't believe this, but that bistro chain, it's partially owned by you. You're listed as an investor. Lenny's mouth went dry. What? I don't own a damn thing in that place. Actually, you do. You bought stock in the company a few years ago, when they were first starting out. It's a small stake, but enough to make you an official investor, Marcus said, his voice tinged with disbelief. And get this, it's not just some mom-and-pop diner anymore. The place has grown. You helped fund it. Lenny's mind raced. How could I not know this? He'd invested in various things over the years, but he never thought much about where his money was going. He trusted the people who ran the investments, but it seemed he'd missed something crucial. Feeling a mix of anger and disbelief, Lenny went straight to Crescent Bistro the following morning, determined to confront the manager, Steve, and demand an explanation. The place was busier now, with a few more customers seated at the bar. The usual hum of conversation filled the air. Lenny walked up to the front desk and asked for Steve. When the manager appeared, he looked taken aback to see Lenny standing there. You again? Steve muttered, clearly uncomfortable. I need to speak to you, Steve, Lenny said, his voice calm but firm. I just found out something that I think you ought to know. Now, I don't know if you're too busy looking down on people like me, but I'm not just some random guy walking in here. I helped put this place on the map. So I'm going to ask you again. Why did you kick me out yesterday? Do I not have a right to be here? Steve's face turned pale as he realized his mistake. He stumbled over his words. I didn't realize you were involved in the company. I thought. Lenny cut him off, his voice unwavering. You thought what? That because I'm black and wear a hat, I don't belong here? You thought you could just throw me out without consequences? The tension in the air was palpable, but Steve's gaze dropped, and Lenny could see the manager's embarrassment beginning to take hold. Steve tried to apologize, but it was too late. Lenny didn't leave the restaurant immediately. Instead, he stayed, sitting at the counter with a coffee, letting Steve stew in his guilt. The scene had already begun to attract attention, and a few regulars who recognized Lenny whispered amongst themselves. Within the hour, the manager returned to him. Lenny left the restaurant that day with a sense of justice, a small victory, but a meaningful one. It wasn't just about getting back at Steve. It was about showing the world that despite being underestimated and pushed aside, he was not someone to be dismissed. A week later, Lenny sat down with the executives of the restaurant chain. They were quick to offer him a seat at the table, literally and figuratively. The company, realizing the depth of their oversight, committed to revamping their policies and creating a more inclusive environment for everyone, staff and customers alike. Lenny didn't just walk away with a changed policy. He walked away knowing that his voice mattered, that he had the power to make change. He had found a sense of peace, no longer just a victim of circumstance, but a force that would shape his community for years to come. And as for Steve, he had learned a hard lesson, one that would stick with him long after Lenny was gone.